This is the webinar after the 38th board meeting of the Green Climate Fund. This took place in Kigali last month. And today, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you here, along with my colleague, William Lynam. And we have some esteemed guest panelists today. Pedro Carvalho, you'll be able to correct my pronunciation soon. Ryan Zuniga and Miles Austin. Again, apologies for not doing names justice. So ECO's been supporting our clients to develop and mobilize climate finance for the past 24 years to reach our ultimate goal, our mission in life. Our vision is a world that is sustainably transformed. We do this by catalyzing this type of systemic transformation. And what we do with these webinars is to communicate what we're learning and bring together like the wonderful people that are panelists today to give some insights that can help you to contribute to transforming the world by mobilizing climate finance. We speak the language of many here at ECO. So we have technical background, financial, cultural. We build in local understanding, and we work to align what our clients need with what we can provide and help them translate what they're looking for into the language of climate funding. So lovely to see you joining us here. Hello, Isaac. Hello, Hugo. Hello, Martin. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining from Malawi there. Do introduce yourself in the chat. And we're going to have one poll question on demographics. If you could fill that in, that would be great. It's always interesting for us to know who's participating in this. So, okay, enough from me. I'd like to introduce you to our panel. We're going to do this a little bit differently from usual. If you followed us for many of these webinars, you'll know that we often make a presentation and then have some Q&A. In this case, we thought we would try having a panel discussion and let us know what you think of it, whether this type of format works for you. We will, as we go, try and answer questions. But the panel that we have are really an interesting group of participants, and I'll ask them just to introduce themselves one by one in a moment. Please do participate as you go along. There is a questions tab. You can head over to the questions tab if you want to table a particular question that we address and participate in that as we go. So participate as we go, write your comments in the chat, submit questions, and we'll be sending out our webinar replay kit. We always get asked this question, will you get the recording? Yes, indeed, we'll send the recording and information that we have. So a good time to introduce the panel. I'm joined here today. I'm going to go through one by one. Let's start with Pedro. Pedro, welcome. Could you say a little bit about yourself, background, and your current role? And please correct the way I pronounced your surname.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Grant. Thank you very much, ECO, for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here today. My name is Pedro Carvalho. So, Grant, you were very close with the pronunciation, but I'm not asking you to speak Brazilian Portuguese. I'm currently one of the active private sector observers representing the constituent from the developing countries. I am a Brazilian national, and beyond the GCF, our engagement with the GCF, I also work in another Ecosecurities, a carbon offsets project developer firm, and I have a role as the head of policy and markets in the company, supporting policy advisory mostly to countries in what regards carbon markets. So very pleased to be here. And my background is in law. I'm a legal policy person, so happy. Looking forward for the discussions, and hopefully I'll be able to contribute with our angle. Thank you very much, Grant.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Great pleasure to have you in the panel today. Next, Ryan. Ryan, I met in Kigali. It was great to meet you and to celebrate a little bit your success there. You tell us who you are, where you work, a little bit about your background. That would be great.
All right, thank you very much. Your pronunciation is also spot on. Ryan Zuniga. I'm from Belize, currently located in Belize. I work for the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. We service the CARICOM countries, 16 CARICOM countries, as it relates to climate finance, but also we provide technical support in terms of climate data, downscale information, just anything climate change. We coordinate the region response to the impact of climate variability and change. So I'm a project development specialist with the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center. I work with the team who we help the countries in the region to articulate their project, not only to the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and any other climate finance institution or resource partners. And I was the lead developer for our most recent approved GCF project, which is the building the adaptive capacity of sugarcane farmers in northern Belize. Very happy to be here. Nice to meet everybody and looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Joining us from Belize, so it's extremely early on your side. We really appreciate that you've joined the call. Thank you. And then Miles Austin, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Thanks, Grant. You got the pronunciation perfect, pleased to say. Okay, so I've been in this space for quite a while. I started out at Ecosecurities in its first incarnation, and ran the CMIA for about 6 years, 5-6 years, which is where I started working with the GCF and around issues at the GCF. Then moved on to the Global Green Growth Institute, and since then, for the last 7 years, I have been an independent consultant working on the interface of climate change policy and finance, and I'm currently the other APSO. So Pedro and I are a kind of double team. I'm very pleased to be here.
Yeah, fantastic, and thank you. So Miles and Pedro are the active observers, so they're the ones that are allowed to go into the boardroom for board meetings and can rub shoulders with all the board members and such like. And they've just started at this board meeting. It's fantastic that you're here, and you're private sector observers. So your perspective is specifically on the private sector side of things, broadly climate finance, but private sector there. And last but not least in any way, William, welcome here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do here at ECO.
Thank you, Grant. And yes, great pronunciation. You've had more practice with me.
Yes.
So I'm William Lynam. I am a senior consultant at ECO. So I work with Grant, and so I guess Grant has already given a bit of an introduction into what ECO does, but yeah, we support clients to achieve low carbon climate resilient development, and I think we're experts in the field of helping various entities design, develop GCF projects and programs. So that's what I do. I'm based in the UK, and I design projects and programs for a number of climate funds, not just the Green Climate Fund. And I work particularly on adaptation and cross-cutting projects and programs. And yes, I suppose my technical background is in forestry, so my projects tend to be related to agriculture, forestry, and other land use. And then also work a bit on, informing policy and doing some capacity building trainings on climate finance, and particularly to direct access entities. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for joining. Fantastic. So, William, you didn't make it to Kigali. You've followed a little bit of what we did there, but the other four of us were at the Kigali session. And I've got a general question to get us started. What would you see as the biggest learning for you, lesson learning or observation that you made from the board meeting that took place in Kigali? Should we start with you, Pedro? And what stood out for you?
Of course. Thanks for the chance again, Grant. From my perspective, I mean, and with the disclaimers you made, saying, I mean, about the start of our mandate now, this was, let's say, the third board meeting that I attended, and I think that the biggest, for me, the biggest observation from this board meeting was the relevance, or maybe the engagement in what regards to the agenda for regionalization of the GCF, and the interest and the general interest from the executive director and also the secretariat to push for this agenda. There is not from me, I mean, my perception is that it's not super. There's no common understanding yet, but there is a very clear mandate to push for more regionalization, whatever this would mean. Especially for Latin America, and considering the time zones between Korea and our colleagues in the Latin American region, right? But I'll stop here. Don't want to spoil any other comments or observations. But for me, that would be the key one.
Okay, thank you very much. Ryan, how about for you?
Yeah, thank you, Grant. It's interesting that's where Pedro started. Because that was the same thing that came to mind, but more so, I'll take it a bit further in terms of the implication it has for countries and the project development process. The new framework or the work plan of the GCF aims for, again, a bit more efficiency as it's translated, and just a more efficient way of doing things. And so really understanding what that means for countries, especially smaller countries in SIDS and the Caribbean, and some of the changes that they would have to make, or some of the adjustments that they would have to make to really respond to what would be the new request of the GCF. I think specifically, again, as also as Pedro said, it's not being clearly communicated at this point in time. So what would be some of the new requirements that countries would have, even in the area of readiness, and what the readiness window would look like, and how it is that we now go from the yearly readiness allocation of 1 million a year to looking at something of 4 million over 4 years or something like that. But just the changes that would come, I think prioritization is also one of those changes, and that's something that we've already seen in our region. So would country need to prioritize putting projects forward? What does that look like? Should they only be allowed to put a certain amount of project in this time period of the work plan? And so really understanding that and how that will affect countries in engaging with the GCF moving forward. Thanks.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, so the regionalization, the issue of readiness, prioritization of projects that could come as a result of the regionalization aspects there. Thank you very much, Ryan. Miles, how about you? What's your take on that? What did you get out of the board?
Yeah, I'm going to go with regionalization as well. I think I think Pedro and Ryan have kind of covered that fairly well. I mean, one thing that Diane Black-Lane brought up, that she's brought up before, is the issue of the no objection process and the NDAs, that's kind of become a de facto approval process, which it was never intended to be. It was purely supposed to be a process that was very light in terms of the capacity that the host nations would have to put into place. And it feels a little bit like it's doing the work that maybe the board and the secretariat ought to be doing in terms of assessing whether or not a project is in full compliance of the GCF's own rules. I kind of see two ways that could potentially go. Is that either if they want to address it, and I have a feeling Diane will keep raising it until they do, is that they could potentially either admit that it has become a de facto approval process, and then that will require large chunks of additional readiness funding in order to fund the capacity to do that, because you'd have to have the NDAs to some extent mirroring the GCF staff, or hit a reset and say, okay, now this was never intended to be this way. I understand that there's a general kind of look at the original founding document of the GCF taking place at the moment and whether or not it's been implemented in the way that was intended. And just say, okay, this hasn't worked out how it was intended and we're going to reset it and this is what it's going to look like now. Those would be two thoughts.
Thank you. So specifically, the no objection letter being used as sort of a go, no-go process that can, I guess, block good projects or such. Like, can you just say a couple more words about that?
Sure. It's not so much the concern that it's blocking good projects or not. That's another issue that we could get into, definitely. It's more that the process itself has become something that it wasn't supposed to be.
Right.
And the countries are being expected to do a full regulatory assessment of the project at a very early stage. And with a program, that's almost impossible, because if you take a multi-country program, whether or not it will invest in that country will, to some extent, particularly with private sector projects, depend on the investment opportunities that come up, which may or may not be there. So it's more that, I think, that the process itself has become very burdensome. And there seems to be some misconception around what the process actually is, both from both sides, I think. And I think some of the NDAs, particularly when they're dealing with private sector projects, if you go to an NDA with your project or your program, you're basically dealing with that in isolation. The NDA is dealing with it in the whole sphere of all the other projects that have come in previously, and they'll say, oh, but this came from the GCF and that X, Y, and Z happened, or X, Y, and Z didn't happen. But they relate that to your project, even though it has nothing to do with it. It's come through the same funding body, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if company A does a project, it doesn't mean, and it doesn't relate in any way to company B's project. And that isn't always there. They're all regarded as being the same thing, which they're not, which is particularly troublesome when you have projects from non-governmental organizations being squeezed into the same intellectual box as private sector projects, because they're very different beasts.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. You've raised a number of risks of project development there, some really relevant items. We'll perhaps come back to those in a moment. William, what do you see from what you observed of the Kigali board meeting?
Right. So as you said, I didn't participate. I didn't go to Kigali. So most of my observations come through you and through some of the other communications that came out of it. But I just in terms of the general portfolio that was brought forward to the board is good to see that there's sort of better representation of adaptation and cross-cutting proposals and more proposals coming from direct access entities. I think there were even I think there are 3 new ones, 3 new for 3 direct access entities. It was the first proposal being brought to the board. So that was encouraging to see. And yeah, I don't know, I think the civil society officer brought up some interesting points as well, like one of them about grant financing, that it should be remain a sort of independent funding approach and not be justified through the level of co-financing concessionality. And I suppose that maybe that will I think one of the risks, one of the things that a lot of people that we have talked to really worry about is the trying to find co-financing. So maybe we'll get into that a bit later. But yeah, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that grant financing, really is needed to help reach the sort of poorest and most disenfranchised, and is also particularly important for adaptation projects.
Yes, indeed. Okay, well, thank you very much. And one of the projects that was approved came from IFAD, where there was that discussion around the modality. Was that appropriate modality? And it was raised really, say, Mozambique, where the project is taking place, least developed country. Is it appropriate for there to be a large loan given to Mozambique that puts further debt on the country? Is that appropriate modality? And indeed, the civil society inputs on that, and also board members were raising that particular issue. Is it the right approach? Is it the right modality for it? GCF responded or was it IFAD responded around saying, well, as a public sector loan that they give, it's very positive terms, and IFAD communicated that the loan is passed on exactly as it's given to them. They're not adding any margin or anything on it, as you would expect from IFAD for it. 40 years, 10-year grace period, and 0% loan. But yeah, there was a lot of discussion around, well, quite a lot of discussion around those issues. Certainly, so we got a number of you in the panel raised the issue of the regional presence. That was definitely a big part of the discussions that took place. Many hours. I think there were 3 or 4 hours spent talking about that, with a plan that came out of that really to present, not at the next board meeting, but at board meeting 30, a bit more of a detailed analysis of what this regional presence actually means. Costs and benefits, cost-benefit analysis for it. So that was one of the things for me also that stood out, or in accreditation of new entities. That was at the end of the day, 8 new entities were accredited, 6 of which were direct access entities and 2 international. Interesting, the portfolio, they have so far 120 accredited entities, 95 of which have an active agreement with the GCF and therefore can receive funding. Of that, there are 31 that are private sector entities, and 19 of them that have gotten approved AMA, Accreditation Master Agreement, for it. So the number of private sector projects private sector accredited entities is significantly less than public sector accredited entities. Yet at board meetings, and you don't have to be a private entity to put forward a proposal that is a private sector project. So there were a good number of approved new supported projects. These were the first projects that were supported under the new GCF2 funding window. So it's the start of GCF2 2024. Not GCF2. I've been working on GCF projects intensively recently, and I get them mixed up in my mind here. So it's GCF2, second funding window for GCF. And one of the first questions raised by the board, which I found an interesting discussion, maybe helps all of you for proposal development, is around why there were so few projects brought to the board. Well, the response from GCF was that we have approximately 2.2 billion to approve each year. And therefore, with 4 board meetings, you would expect there to be around $500 million of projects each board meeting. And that's the limiting factor. Why that's important is that it influences so many other things, the process of trying to get a project to the board and some significant delays. And in the corridors, I was speaking to one accredited entity who said that they have got 4 projects that are just stuck with the GCF. They've been submitted, everything done, everything, ready projects, feedback received, but no slot. They haven't got into any of the board meetings. And those projects have been stuck for over a year now. So, it depends really where you stand, but how to get that access when there is only $500 million to be approved at each board meeting, approximately, it's competitive, yeah. And there are very many reasons why a project would go forward for it. So there's a little bit of long input from me. I just wanted to mention a couple of other things. The African constituency really raised the issue about a lack of energy access projects from the board, saying energy access is a primary need in Africa, addressing both mitigation and adaptation needs. There need to be more of these sort of projects. And there was a strong call from more than one board member to talk about the need for capacity building and technology transfer and more of that. With the board approved projects, ones that stood out to me, there's a project by SIDBI, their first project in India, which was a SAP project. It was raised because it's a private sector project. It was raised, should this really be the simplified approval process? Because there could be projects that are approved that have a larger than benign mitigation environmental impact. So just to raise that, that's private sector, Pedro, Miles, most of the private sector projects are these open-ended funds, aren't they? And they always cause a bit of a discussion in the board. They keep saying you may approve projects that are not ones that we particularly, that are not they're going to have a different environmental impact or such like. Did that stand out to you at all in terms of those various discussions? It applied to the e-mobility project from ADB, also to the Confides project around, it's a long discussion, but the ITAB put in a some conditionality for that project, which board members were saying perhaps we shouldn't, but that's not really the topic of this question. This question's around, private sector projects have a difficult passage.
Perhaps I can start. We had the Ghana bank case this past session, which was quite clear. The scope of the project was quite clear, solar PVs, but at least like in my experience, seeing the private sector proposals, they are always junior equity or maybe junior loans that are used to scale or maybe mitigate the risks for private sector capital deployment, right? So and what we see is most of the times funds being established, and I mean I think it's the nature of an investment fund not to have like the concrete project in the end of the day. But I would maybe a comment that I could make here would be looking into the strategic plan that is calling for more private sector engagement. And I think that on a broader sense, my perception is that the GCF is still pretty much focused, or I wouldn't say the word biased, but pretty much with almost a tunnel view on public entities, right? Or maybe public type of projects presented by public entities. So there is a change whenever we engage with the private sector, and I think that there's a broader call for the strategic plan, but also from from the executive director position and mandate when she took over to try to foster more private sector engagement. So perhaps, I mean, the solution to that is, I would say, more safeguards, but I don't think we all need that or want that. But at the same time, I mean, ensuring that we have a bit more certainty, but more importantly for me, certainty about the capital deployment. But more importantly, I think it's about like a broader understanding from the board members and maybe the secretariat as well on the role that the private capital can play and can be harmonized with the GCF fund, because in the end of the day, I mean, there was a paraphrasing a statement that was made inside the boardroom that I can't remember which board member made this, but they were saying, look, we're specialists on multilateral and climate finance multilateral agreements, but we do not know maybe the technology that is being deployed or maybe the financial flows that are being negotiated. So I think that there's I don't think it's a voluntary decision to undermine private sector projects, but perhaps is a more understanding on how those funds could be deployed could be appreciated by the private sector. Because then, I mean, I don't want to connect with the second question, but I mean, in terms of risks, that is, I think, like the biggest risk from the private sector perspective. It's like, okay, we know how the process is going to start, but I don't know how the process is going to finish, right? So, I mean, we have the SIX, we have the ITAB, and then in the end of the day, we might have the board with potentially some political views barring or banning or blocking some projects. So I think that from the private sector perspective, and speaking with different AEs, the complexity is precisely like on understanding on the financial instruments and how they are being deployed, but also that's one way from one hand. But from the other hand, I mean, if the GCF wants to channel the private sector capital to specific purposes, then this could be made more clearly on the documents and the rules, so that, okay, if I want to engage, if I'm a private sector AE and I want to engage with the GCF, I know what's the pathway to do that, or maybe I know what they want to do. But right now, I think that there's a lot of conflicting signs, and that's the feedback that I hear from the private sector AEs, and I think that that's one of the reasons why, I mean, out of all the accredited private sector AEs, I mean, whenever we speak with them, many of them are saying, look, yeah, GCF, we have our accreditation, but it was such a struggle to get to the accreditation that, we're not even more interested on submitting an FP now, because we really don't understand how this could end up. So
it's the unknowns of the process. I mean, that's going into our question in the GCF proposal development process. What areas or activities do you find most risk prone? Let's jump straight into that. And Pedro, what do you see as most risk prone?
I think I would come back to those as you're calling, right, the unknowns, right? I think I mean, situations like okay, what's the legal status of ITAB recommendations or requests for changes on the FPs, and how is this perceived by the board? At the same time, I mean, you have the SIX with different engagements, or maybe this continuous engagement. During Kigali here in a conversation with one AE, not from the private sector, what I heard is that, okay, before it reaches a certain point of the process, they're not so much focused or engaging with the process, because they're like, look, it's so uncertain until specific level of the process, like, I don't know, SIG 3, that until that moment we're not committing a lot of resources, right? So I think that the unknown for the private sector is a big a big risk for project development under the GCF. At least based on what I have been hearing and the view that I have.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. CCCCC 5Cs is not for profit, is public sector organization. What is your perspective on the really risks in the process of putting together a proposal?
Yeah, thank you for that. And so, despite us being a primarily public sector entity, we've tried to engage with the private sector as well, given where we sit, our unique position within the Caribbean, and to support both sectors in all sectors, right? So both the private and public sector in all sectors. And I think there was a very good point Pedro make, but not only for us and from our experience, not only the unknown, but the process in terms of length it takes to go from the concept note stage to the funding proposal stage. And it's hard for you to convince the private sector entity to tie up or ring fence monies for that long. And this is why I think you see a lot of these open-ended projects where it's more the development of funds, but you don't see the specific project coming through when these proposals are put forward, because how do you engage? For us, for example, it takes roughly 3 years from project concept to funding proposal. And so how do you ask the private sector entity to ring fence an amount of money for that long when that's money that's at a loss to them? That's money sitting there that they're not going to collect any type of profit from. And then the unknown comes into that. It's not even a guarantee that if you go through this process, that this thing will eventually become what you want it to be. And so that has been part of our challenge, convincing the private sector entities to ring fence or to wait or to go through the process, I should say, for 3 years or so. Without any certainty. So that's the private sector side. When it comes to risk, and I go back to your earlier point about financial instruments and the use of financial instruments, and the need for co-financing and how do you match grant and GCF funds on this principle of additionality as they would refer to it. All right, and so how do you're able to demonstrate that you're only funding the aspect of climate change and not the aspect that they would term development or related to the development part of a project. But when you're working with SIDS and smaller countries, it's kind of difficult to look at it in two different pots, in two different ways. But the challenge we've had and the risk is being able to tie that to beneficiaries. Once it is that you look at adaptation project and you look at the amount of grants that you're mobilizing, GCF tend to ask you to really look at the beneficiary number to kind of justify the cost per beneficiary in these funding proposals in these projects. But when you're looking at a SIDS, when you're looking at Belize, for example, we have 400,000 people, and then you remember you're competing with larger countries, and so it may seem from an investment standpoint that in these larger countries you're getting more bang for your buck. But can we really put a price on adaptation, especially when you look at the gap to reach resilience? If you look at that, if you look at the countries in the Caribbean, and I'm speaking from the countries that we serve, the gap to get us, because we're so far behind and we're so vulnerable and so impacted, it might require a bit more investment in our people to get us to that point where we need to be considered resilient or to move towards a resilient pathway. When you're looking at the larger country, the amount of money needed per beneficiary might not be so much because they're not that far behind in terms of that gap. And so you look at the cost per beneficiary, and this is just an arbitrary number here. It may look like $2,000 per person in a SIDS context, and because of the small population, you may see a larger number there versus a larger country with a larger population. That does not require that much investment to get them to a resilient standpoint that may look like $200 per person or $300 per person. And so the challenge and the risk to us is being able to justify that. And it's almost seem like we're asked to manufacture beneficiaries. So to speak, we come from small countries, we service small countries, we don't have a lot of people in the context of things are relative to the larger countries. And so how do we put these conversations forward for the GCF to understand or be able to have that conversation with us in terms of, can you really put a cost on building resilience, or is it a blanket cost? Can you look at it across nations and countries? And I think that's important and an important risk for us to try and address in making these proposals successful. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. How are you seeing it, Miles? What's your take on risks of putting together GCF projects?
Yeah, I mean, as Ryan alluded to, the timeframes involved, and I think there's a real mismatch between the way the private sector operates and the way that the GCF currently, with the timelines it takes to get a funding proposal through. Although there are outliers in both directions, some of the funding proposals go through in kind of a year or less. I heard a record to me for the longest one at the last board meeting. I'm not going to say which one it was, but they took 7 years. Which is kind of insane. And that partly, I think, is why a lot of the approach is, as you said, multi-country funds, precisely because if you focused on a particular activity and then you came back to try and fund that activity 3 or 4 years, or even 2 years down the line, likely the particular company that you were going to try and fund, if they really urgently needed the capital, they're not going to be there anymore. They're going to be out of business. So I think the timelines are one of the key things. I also think, and William kind of alluded to this, that when the board says, oh, we'd like to see more of X and more of Y kind of projects, and then at the next board meeting, there are more of X and more of Y presented to the board. Those aren't projects that were just lying around out in the world that the GCF went out and found. Those are projects that have been in the pipeline sometimes for a very considerable amount of time. And there is a perception, and I suspect it's accurate, that sometimes projects get put on the shelf by the GCF because they don't match in a way up with the expectations of the board in terms of the bouquet of projects that they're supposed to bring, and they don't quite fit there. And we've got 5 of this type of projects, and actually that's all we can do. And even though your project is absolutely fine, would be approved by the board, it's going to have to wait here.
Yeah.
And given that, you know, sometimes there can be 4 or 5 months between board meetings, that's actually considerable risk for private capital to go through the whole of the arduous process and all of the approvals. And it is rigorous, and it should be rigorous. But then at the end, have a process that you have no control over and no real transparency. No one actually will say to you, well, you didn't get to go this time because we chose 5 projects of this type and we couldn't have 6.
Yeah.
That's a considerable risk.
Yeah.
I think possibly that could be, again, that could be addressed by interboard approval, so that we get away from this process of having a huge chunk of projects that the board has to process, that the CSOs have to process, that we have to process, that the ITEP has to process, that the Secretariat has to process, rather than having just kind of a smooth stream of stuff going on through the year.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I mentioned is one of accredited entities that have had 4 projects frozen for more than a year. So it's not just necessarily bouncing it over to the next board meeting or such like, but the GCF is crafting the selection of projects that go to each board meeting. One of the reasons why I raise these issues of what's raised by board members at the particular board is that those are signals, I think, around what they're looking for. Now, I know there's a lot of really good questions coming through. I'm not exactly sure. What I'll probably do is take the questions in the Q&A. Really do appreciate them. Archie, I saw you asked about the regional presence. We did talk a little bit about that. It's difficult for me to prioritize or to put one of these questions with our replay kit. We'll give a bit of a written answer to this, and we'll give a chance for panelists if they want to say something or to highlight a response, then they can also put that in. So thank you for those questions. They won't be lost. We will get your written answers in the replay kit. Yeah, we did a survey before the board meeting. We got around 65 respondents from it, and we asked them that very question, sort of what do you see as in the proposal development process, what is the most risk-prone activities that are there? And I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully that's big enough for you to see. What I've done is put down on this side the different stages as GCF identifies them in their in the programming guide. There's stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Stage 3 is the concept note development, and stage 4 is the funding proposal development, and 5 is the reviews, the feedback that comes from it. And these initial stages, like country entity programs and targeted project development, it's really related to what you say there, Miles, in terms of projects. Is GCF getting the projects they want coming forward? That's targeted project generation. But at the same time, when there's at one board wish for more of one type of project to the next board, of course those projects aren't generated in the last 4 months, such like. Anyway, this is what we got. We put into the quiz, into the survey, 2 catch-all categories: the development of the concept note and the development of the full funding proposal. So we got a lot of the votes, and we asked each person to put 3 options there. So if you exclude those 2 from the list, you see absolutely at top of the list was the risk of identification of co-financing. No one's mentioned that. And really from ECO's perspective, we're not seeing that as quite as high as the score here. Camille, you've asked the question around the challenges for accredited entities. A large proportion of the respondents here are accredited entities. And so this is some views from accredited entities, but also project designers like us and NDAs. So identification of co-financing comes out as a very big issue, and the issue of stakeholder engagement. These are the top 2 scoring if you exclude just the catch-all ones for it. It's interesting to see, if you look at the scores here, this is an early stage risk. How do you identify and get the commitment of a direct access entity? And certainly from Miles and Pedro, we've seen a lot of project of private sector companies whose first question is, do we become accredited? How do we find an accredited entity? How do we respond to that? The issue of political positioning, this can be in-country and outside. It can be GCF's positioning of projects. So I'm not exactly sure what that covers, but it's seen as quite a high level risk. And also the risk of data availability. How do you get it? How do you access it? I should have mentioned already, of course, the receiving feedback from the GCF. 18% of the respondents identified that in their top 3 risks. Yeah, then we went on to ask them of all of those risks, what are the aspects of the risk? What sort of in a cross-cutting question do you find to be the most critical? And we gave a list, A to L, and we've given these to the panel members as well. If you are able to, and if you have that that table, which of these risks do you see as of these aspects to find to be most critical to success? Let me just find my mouse here. Where am I? Okay, here we go. Pedro, you've seen this list, I think. Did you manage to choose one of them that was particularly?
Yes, Grant. I was just taking notes because the list that I got was we had a lot of numbers, so I was just tracing back the numbers to the
yes.
to
So
the
if
letters.
you chose J, it's 10.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, I would say, I mean, a short list. I mean, 3 of them that are for me, they're somehow interconnected, right? So J, G, J, and L. So understanding the particular context and availability of documentation and information, as we discussed now. Project management of the design process, and understanding the process itself. And I mean, here I come back to this point of not necessarily understanding the process, but understanding the unknowns, or being able to have visibility and clarity about the unknowns of the process, which to a certain extent is the underlying rationale to justify as well the particular context of the intervention, and how to understand whether that activity is eligible, or maybe the sweet spot for GCF funding.
Okay, thank you very much. Ryan, did you have a chance to look through the list?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, not to repeat what Pedro said. While I do take some of them to be what he said to be very relevant, I'll go with K, D, and F. Right? And I'm speaking here from the accredited entity standpoint, and us engaging with our partners. One of the things that I've found to be very successful is just keeping the ball rolling, and that speaks to K in terms of having sufficient internal capacity. I think if your response to the GCF is very timely, if they send you comments or they send you feedback and you're able to get back responses to them in a very short span, you maintain the interest of the GCF Secretariat in moving your project forward. Keep in mind, they also have a large portfolio. I think this is also a complaint from countries in terms of the GCF being on the staff and not able to serve or not having the amount of capacity that they would require to serve the countries that they serve. And so once you have the interest of your task manager and the interest of the GCF, I think keeping the ball rolling, being able to respond to them very timely, and being able to get back your feedback to them allows the attention to be kept on your project. I think if you tend to lull in your response, then their attention goes to another project, and it becomes very difficult to bring them back to where you want them to be. And so having sufficient internal capacity is key to that. For us, for me in particular, I would have to coordinate the response of my team in terms of the ESS, in terms of the agenda, in terms of the finance people. And the GCF have a very similar setup, but they have entire departments to look at these things, right? So you have to have the capacity in-house to be able to speak the language of all the departments that they have when they move your proposal or your concept note through the review process. So I think that is key. Moving to F, and that brings us to the cost it requires to get these things up off the ground. a concept note, as simple as it may seem, and I've started to see the baseline shift a bit from what was acceptable at the concept note stage for you to move on to the next step to know the type of requirements that they're asking. And I don't know if that's related to the prioritization or if that related to not having the sufficient amount of monies to service the project that's coming through, and so they have to kind of stall or kind of pay more attention to the type of projects that they're putting forward. But I see, and especially as it relates to the climate rationale, the amount of information that is required for you to move forward, what it is, what should a GCF concept note look like? What's the requirement of a GCF concept note look like?
Yeah.
And then when you move from project to project or sector to sector, you tend to see that's not standard. It's very different across projects. It's very different across task manager. It's very different across whom you're interacting with the GCF, which is also a risk, right? Which is also a risk.
Yeah.
But it requires a lot of resource to get this thing up and going, and for countries or for entities, and usually the most vulnerable people that we're trying to address, trying to serve and support, may not have the resources necessary to start to move these things forward. And so that has become a challenge. And some AEs might not also have the money required to start to put the bodies in front of the concept note, the resources in front of the concept note to get that to where we need to get to. And then back to your point about the NDAs, right? And I think it was Miles who mentioned the NDA kind of being that first step in approving project or not, but managing those relationships and the different relationship of the stakeholders on the ground, because priorities also change, which is E, and I was struggling between D and E and which one I don't want to put forward. But when you look at the political priorities on the ground and the long time frame that it takes to move a project forward, sometimes you have elections, for example, or political priorities change, and your project gets stuck in the pipeline there before it even reaches the GCF because it's no longer a priority of the government, which then is communicated through you via the NDA. And so this is not something that they want to put forward. And the GCF put in so much emphasis on the non-objection process, and the NDA saying this is something that we want to move forward with. Once it falls out of the priority of the government or of the NDA, then your project really gets stuck and it's nowhere. It doesn't move, right? Even if it's a very, very good project, but it's not aligned with the political priority. So I think I'll stop there and focus on those for now.
Yeah, very good insights. Thank you. I'm aware that we've used up our time. People are going to be dropping out of the call. If you can stay, maybe just 10 minutes more, that would be wonderful. Same for panelists. If you're able to stay a little bit longer, that would be great. I'd love to get Miles and William's insights into this, and then I'll just make some sort of closing observations, I think, that would be useful. And once again, thank you. If you did write a question online, we will answer those in the replay kit, and we'll send some written responses to the questions that were raised there. Miles, what's your take on these risks?
Right. I think changing priorities is definitely one. If you look, and that is more looking at the way the board guides the secretariat. And as I said before, you have very long development times for a lot of these projects. And what might be flavor of the month or flavor of the last board meeting 3 years ago may not be so this time. And I think you mentioned sufficient upfront investment. It's very hard to, if you look at a company's burn rate, to match that with a process that might take 1 year, might take 4 years. It's very hard to plan in terms of how much money you're actually going to need to do. So that's F. And then I don't think H is a risk because, as we said, there seems to be plenty of time to go through things, and the GCF, the Secretariat, is not shy about asking you to rewrite things. I think H is definitely not a risk. I think K, in terms of having sufficient internal capacity in relation to the burn rate and the time it takes, because a lot of the staff that are required to develop an FP are quite specialized. They tend to be in demand. And if a project is taking a long time and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere, then they'll leave. Mm-hmm. So I think having sufficient internal capacity is a definite risk, and it's a risk arising, again, from the timelines that are involved. Yeah. And I wonder if it wouldn't be possible for the PSF to maybe commit to a maximum amount of time for a project to be taken through the whole development process. Mm. On that note, I'm going to have to step out at this point. My apologies, but it's been a great discussion, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for participating. You'll have to watch how people respond to that in the replay kit, which will be sending out. Thank you, Miles.
I will do. Okay, thank you, Grant.
William, maybe you'll put in a vote for the realistic timeframes. Let's see.
I actually was going to say realistic timeframes.
Yeah.
I think because in the previous discussion,
yeah,
I think everybody had mentioned how the understanding of the timeframes is a big. The long timeframes are a huge risk to project development, and so I mean it can go in either way. I've seen it in my own projects that I'm working on that often sometimes the timeframes are very long, and I think again maybe relating to L, the understanding of the process itself, I think understanding that the timeframes is an important aspect to that's critical to success. But yeah, understanding the timeframes, which can again I think depend on the priorities of the board at the time, can sort of sway the timeframes needed for various deliverables. For one of the projects I'm working on, it took almost 4 years just to get the concept note through, and then it was prioritized, it seemed, and then they wanted to have a lot of these deliverables within a very short amount of time. And the aspect that also was critical to success to then push it through when it was perhaps a priority was K, was again to have that sort of sufficient internal capacity. And yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of the things that all the other panelists have said, but yes, what Ryan was talking about in terms of the capacity, the upfront investment needed, are also all critical to success.
Yeah, thank you, William. Well, we put this question out in our survey, and in fact, we had 34% of the respondents were for L, and 28% of respondents put K as the top one. So you'll see a pattern here. It goes up to 20%. Everything from I down is got 20% of the votes for it. H on the list was, I'm reading on the wrong list. So everything up to H was 30% of the vote, or because people could choose 3, just like here. So everything up to H, sorry about that, I gave is 30% or more. And the realistic timeframes for me is a massive thing, because it's very, very, very slow. Yeah. And then GCF says, yes, it's for this board meeting, and suddenly you're working 24 hours a day, or the clients want you to work 24 hours a day for the next week in order to respond to questions which are not straightforward to respond to, where you may even have to go and find additional information. So in fact, this table has got the lowest one. This took 5% of the votes in our survey, and this one took actually 55% of the votes. So we could put H, I, J, K, and L all into the center of the target there. All right. Well, thank you so much for everyone for participating. I appreciate it. It's been a different type of session. We didn't manage to address comments from the audience, except a little bit diagonally in a way. So apologies for that. A huge thank you to Miles, to Ryan. I really appreciate your early morning start, to Pedro and to William. I've really enjoyed the discussion. I think in future we have a discussion like this, fewer questions or more time for input. The replay kit will be sent by email. And you can sign up for our newsletter for more invitations to analyze and discuss GCF project design. We'll also be releasing this 25th edition of GCF Insight soon, which covers what we've spoken about today in terms of risks. To receive that, make sure you're signed up for the monthly newsletter. Please do visit our website. It is ecoltdgroup.com. Connect with us on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you have further questions or comments, like to give feedback, please do get in touch. You can get in touch with me. My email's on the display, and Williams is as well. And we can connect you with the panelists as well, if they are up for that. So thank you. Oh, sorry, I've turned off my colleagues' screen sharing by clicking stop screen sharing. Sorry about that, Jack. That is a very good reminder to say that the webinar doesn't just happen with those of us who are sort of the front of the stage here. There's a lot more happening behind the stage than there is in the front. And so a huge thank you to Jack and to Mariella for putting it all together, making some fantastic slides, moderating the chat, and keeping us a little bit on track. Thank you very much for all that hard work there. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you in our next webinar after the next board meeting. Thank you, Ryan. Really appreciate your early start. Thank you, Pedro. Really appreciate it. Thank you, William. Hope you have a good rest of the day. Hope it goes well.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.